Hello. All right. So yesterday I had some trouble. Uh, YouTube took down the video because I don't know why yet. I wrote him a couple emails, but things weren't appropriate or deemed inappropriate. So I made this video accessible to all people, and it's not for kids. So hopefully this time will be better. It might get cut off again because of copyright. That's the only thing I can think of, is that I was breaking copyright, so they took it off. Which, if they were able to do that just from me reading the words out loud, that's pretty crazy technology. So we're gonna do something a little different. Oh, also, I got a few questions. No, you don't have to read all three of those books that I put up there. Those are three books that I'm going to read portions of each one, and then from your feedback, I will decide which one I will continue reading every night at 9 p.m. for about 20-30 minutes. Also, yesterday, I read for an hour with my microphone muted, so there was no sound on that video. It was just me moving my lips for an hour. But YouTube cut me off after 12 minutes anyway, so I don't know. Pretty big fail for the first attempt. So this time's got to be better because I figured out how to work the microphone. I'm wearing a hat because I haven't showered today, and it's not looking good. But that's what it is. You don't have to read all those books I put up there. I put those books up there so that you can read along with me. Today, I'm going to read the first book of the Foundation trilogy. Not the first book. The first couple of chapters of the first book of the Foundation trilogy. When the book was released, it was called The Foundation's Edge, but they remade it, and it's now just called The Foundation. It's by Isaac Asimov, who's a really fascinating guy. He came over from Russia, I believe, when he was like 5 by himself on a boat, and then became a really famous and successful science fiction writer. I love this book. So I'm going to read a couple chapters of this book today. Tomorrow, I'm going to read a couple chapters from a book called The Plague by Albert Camus. I figured that was appropriate for the circumstances we find ourselves in. And the next day, I'm going to read a chapter or two from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And depending on the feedback I get from people who are participating, we'll decide which one to read moving forward. So if you missed this live stream, I'm going to try and put the video up afterwards. We'll see how successful that will be. But if you're watching, thank you. Please comment with each other if you can on the videos. Okay, so The Foundation. All right. Part 1 is called The Psychohistorians. Hari Seldon, born in the 11,988th year of the Galactic Era, died 12,069. The dates are more commonly given in terms of the current Foundation era as 79 to the year 1 FE. Born to middle-class parents in Helicon, Arcturus sector, where his father, in a legend of doubtful authenticity, was a tobacco grower in the hydroponic plants of the planet. He early showed amazing ability in mathematics. Anecdotes concerning his ability are innumerable, and some are contradictory. At the age of 2, he is said to have. Undoubtedly, his greatest contributions were in the field of psychohistory. Seldon found the field a little more than a set of vague axioms, and he left it a profound statistical science. The best existing authority we have for the details of his life is the biography written by Gall Dornick, who, as a young man, met Seldon 2 years before the great mathematician's death. The story of the meeting. Encyclopedia Galactica. All quotations from the Encyclopedia Galactica here reproduced are taken from the 116th edition, published in 1020 FE by the Encyclopedia Galactic Publishing Co., terminus with the permission of the publishers. His name was Gal Dornick, and he was just a country boy who had never seen Trantor before. That is, not in real life. He had seen it many times on the hypervideo, and occasionally in tremendous three-dimensional newscasts covering an imperial coronation or the opening of a galactic council. Even though he had lived all his life on the world of Synax, which circled a star on the edges of the blue drift, he was not cut off from civilization, you see. At that time, no place in the galaxy was. There were nearly 25 million inhabited planets in the galaxy then, and not one but owed allegiance to the Empire whose seat was on Trantor. It was the last half-century in which that could be said. To Gal, the trip was an undoubted climax of his young scholarly life. He had been in space before, so that the trip, as a voyage, was nothing and nothing more, and meant little to him. To be sure, he had traveled previously only as far as Synax's only satellite, in order to get data on the mechanics of a meteor driftage, which he needed for his dissertation. But space travel was all one whether one traveled 500,000 miles or as many light years. He had steeled himself just a little for the jump through hyperspace, a phenomenon one did not experience in simple interplanetary trips. The jump remained, and would probably remain forever, the only practical method of traveling between the stars. The travel through the ordinary space could proceed at no rate more rapid than that of ordinary light, a bit of scientific knowledge that belonged among the items known since the forgotten dawn of human history. And that would have meant years of travel between even the nearest of inhabited systems. Through hyperspace, the unimaginable region that was neither space nor time, matter nor energy, something nor nothing, one could traverse the length of the galaxy in the interval between two neighboring instants of time. Gal had waited for the first of those jumps with a little dread curled gently in his stomach, and it ended in nothing more than a trifling jar, a little internal kick, which ceased an instant before he could be sure he had felt it. That was all. And after that, there was only the ship, large and glistening, the cool production of 12,000 years of imperial progress, and himself, with his doctorate in mathematics, freshly obtained, and an invitation from the great Harry Seldon to come to Trantor and join the vast and somewhat mysterious Seldon Project. What Gal was waiting for, after the disappointment of the jump, was the first sight of Trantor. He haunted the view room. The steel-shuttered lids were rolled back at announced times, and he was always there, watching the hard brilliance of the stars, enjoying the incredible hazy warmth of star cluster, like a giant conglomeration of fireflies caught in mid-motion and stilled forever. At one time, there was the cold, blue-white smoke of gaseous nebula within 5 light years of the ship, spreading over the window like distant milk, filling the room with an icy tinge, and disappearing out of sight 2 hours later, after another jump. The first sight of Trantor's sun was that of a hard white speck, all but lost in a myriad such, and recognizable only because it was pointed out by the ship's guide. The stars were thick here near the galactic center, but with each jump it shone more brightly, drowning out the rest, paling them and thinning them out. An officer came through and said, "View room will be closed for the remainder of the trip. Prepare for landing." Gal had followed after, clutching at the sleeve of the white uniform with the space and sun of the Empire on it. He said, "Would it be possible to let me stay? I should like to see Trantor." The officer smiled, and Gal flushed a bit. It occurred to him that he spoke with a provincial accent. The officer said, "We'll be landing on Trantor by morning. I want to see it from space." "Oh, sorry, my boy. If this were a space yacht, you might manage it. But we're spinning down, sunside. You wouldn't want to be blinded, burnt, and radiation scarred all at the same time, would you?" Gal started to walk away. The officer called after him, "Trantor would only be a gray blur anyway, kid. Why don't you take a space tour once you hit Trantor? They're cheap." Gal looked back. "Thank you very much." It was childish to feel disappointed, but childishness comes almost as naturally to a man as to a child, and there was a lump in Gal's throat. He had never seen Trantor spread out in all its incredibility, as large as life, and he hadn't expected to wait longer. Chapter 2. The ship landed in a medley of noises. There was a far-off hiss of the atmosphere cutting and sliding past the metal of the ship. There was the steady drone of the conditioners fighting the heat of friction, and the slower rumble of the engines enforcing deceleration. There was the sound of men and women gathering in the debarkation rooms, and the grind of hoists lifting baggage, mail, and freight to the long axis of the ship, from which they would be later moved along the unloading platform. Gall felt the slight jar that indicated the ship no longer had the independent motion of its own. Ship's gravity had been giving way to planetary gravity for hours. Thousands of passengers had been sitting patiently in the debarkation rooms, which swung easily on yielding force fields to accommodate its orientation to the changing direction of the gravitational forces. Now they were crawling down curving ramps to the large yawning locks. Gall's baggage was minor. He stood at a desk as it was quickly and expertly taken apart and put together again. His visa was inspected and stamped. He himself paid no attention. This was Trantor. The air seemed a little thicker here, the gravity a bit greater than on his home planet of Synax, but he would get used to that. He wondered if he would get used to the immensity. The debarkation building was tremendous. The roof was almost lost in the heights. Gall could almost imagine the clouds could form beneath its immensity. He could see no opposite wall, just men and desks and converging floor till it faded out into haze. The man at the desk was speaking again. He sounded annoyed. He said, "Move on, Dornick." And he had to open the visa, look again before he remembered the name. Gall said, "What, where?" The man at the desk jerked a thumb. "Taxis to the right and third left." Gall moved, seeing the glowing twists of air suspended high in nothingness and reading "taxis to all points." A figure detached itself from anonymity and stopped at the desk as Gall left. The man at the desk looked up and nodded briefly. The figure nodded in return and followed the young immigrant. He was in time to hear Gall's destination. Gall found himself hard against the railing. The small sign said "Supervisor." The man to whom the sign referred did not look up. He said, "Where to?" Gall wasn't sure, but even a few seconds' hesitation meant men queuing in line behind him. The supervisor looked up. "Where to?" Gall's funds were low, but there was only one night. Gall's funds were low, but there was only this one night, and then he would have a job. He tried to sound nonchalant. "A good hotel, please." The supervisor was unimpressed. "They're all good. Name one." Gall said desperately, "The nearest one, please." The supervisor touched a button. A thin line of light formed along the floor, twisting among others, which brightened and dimmed in different colors and shades. A ticket was shoved into Gall's hands. It glowed faintly. The supervisor said 1.12. Gall fumbled for the coins. He said, "Where do I go?" "Follow the light. The ticket will keep glowing as long as you're pointed in the right direction." Gall looked up and began walking. There were hundreds creeping across the vast floor, following their individual trials, sifting and straining themselves through intersection points to arrive at their respective destination. His own trail ended. A man in glaring blue and yellow uniform, shining and new in unstainable plasto-textile, reached for his 2 bags. "Direct line to the Luxor," he said. The man who followed Gall heard that. He also heard Gall say "fine" and watched him enter the blunt-nosed vehicle. The taxi lifted straight up. Gall stared out the curved, transparent window, marveling at the sensation of air flight within an enclosed structure and clutching instinctively at the back of the driver's seat. The vastness contracted, and the people became ants at random distribution. The scene contracted further and began to slide backward. There was a wall ahead. It began high in the air and extended upward out of sight. It was riddled with holes that were the mouths of tunnels. Gall's taxi moved toward one, then plunged into it. For a moment, Gall wondered idly how his driver could pick out one amongst so many. There was now only blackness, with nothing but the past flashing of color signal light to relieve the gloom. The air was full of a rushing sound. Gall leaned forward against the deceleration, and the taxi popped out of the tunnel and descended to the ground level once more. "The Luxor Hotel," said the driver unnecessarily. He helped Gall with his baggage, accepted a 10th credit tip with a businesslike air, picked up a waiting passenger, and was rising again. In all this, from the moment of debarkation, there was no glimpses of the sky. Chapter 3. Trantor. At the beginning of the 13th millennium, this tendency reached its climax. As the center of the imperial government for unbroken hundreds of generations and located as it was toward the central regions of the galaxy, among the most densely populated and industrially advanced worlds of the system, it could scarcely help being the densest and richest clot of humanity the race had ever seen. Its urbanization, progressing steadily, had finally reached the ultimate. All the land surface of Trantor, 75 million square miles in extent, was a single city. The population at its height was in excess of 40 billions. This enormous population was devoted almost entirely to the administrative necessities of empire and found themselves all too few for the complications of the task. It is to be remembered that the impossibility of proper administration of the galactic empire under the uninspired leadership of the later empires was a considerable factor in the fall. Daily, fleets of ships in tens of thousands brought the produce of 20 agricultural worlds to the dinner tables of Trantor. Its dependence upon the outer worlds for food and indeed for all necessities of life made Trantor increasingly vulnerable to conquest by siege. In the last millennium of the empire, the monotonously numerous revolts made emperor after emperor conscious of this, and imperial policy became little more than the protection of Trantor's delicate jugular vein. Encyclopedia Galactica. Gaul was not certain whether the sun shone, or, for that matter, whether it was day or night. He was ashamed to ask. All the planets seemed to live beneath metal. The meal of which he had just partaken had been labeled luncheon, but there were many planets which lived a standard time scale that took no account of the perhaps inconvenient alteration of day and night. The rate of planetary turnings differed, and he did not know that of Trantor. At first, he had eagerly followed the signs to the sunroom and found it but a chamber for basking in artificial radiation. He lingered a moment or two, then returned to the Luxor's main lobby. He said to the room clerk, "Where can I buy a ticket for a planetary tour?" "Right here." "When will it start?" "You just missed it. Another one tomorrow. Buy a ticket now and we'll reserve a place for you." "Oh, tomorrow would be too late. He would have to be at the university tomorrow," he said. "There wouldn't be an observation tower or something, I mean, in the open air?" "Sure, sell you a ticket for that if you want. Better let me check if it's raining or not." He closed the contact at his elbow and read the following letters that raced across the frosted screen. Gal read with him. The room clerk said, "Good weather. Come to think of it, I do believe it's the dry season now," he added conversationally. "I don't bother with the outside myself. The last time I was in the open was 3 years ago. You see it once, you know, and that's all there is to it. Here's your ticket, special elevator in the rear. It's marked to the tower. Just take it." The elevator was the new sort that ran by gravitic repulsion. Gaul entered, and the others flowed in behind him. The operator closed the contact. For a moment, Gaul felt suspended in space as gravity switched to zero, and then he had weight again in small measure as the elevator accelerated upward. Deceleration followed, and his feet left the floor. He squawked again against his will. The operator called out, "Tuck your feet under the railing. Can't you read the sign?" The others had done so. They were smiling at him as he madly and vainly tried to clamber back down the wall. Their shoes pressed upward against the chromium of the railings that stretched across the floor in parallels set 2 feet apart. He had noticed those railings on entering and had ignored them. Then a hand reached out and pulled him down. He gasped his thanks as the elevator came to a halt. He stepped out upon an open terrace bathed in white brilliance that hurt his eyes. The man, whose helping hand he had just now been the recipient of, was immediately behind him. The man said kindly, "Plenty of seats." Gal closed his mouth. He had been gaping, and said, "It certainly seems so." He started for them automatically, then stopped. He said, "If you don't mind, I'll just stop a moment by the railing. I want to look a bit." The man waved him on good-naturedly, and Gaul leaned out over the shoulder-high railing and bathed himself in all the panorama. He could not see the ground. It was lost in ever-increasing complexities of man-made structures. He could see no horizon other than that of the metal against the sky, stretching out to almost uniform grayness, and he knew it was so over all the land surface of the planet. There was scarcely any motion to be seen. A few pleasure craft blazed against the sky, but all the busy traffic of billions of men going on, he knew beneath the metal skin of the world. There was no green to be seen. No green, no soil, no life other than man. Somewhere on the world, he realized vaguely, was the emperor's palace, set amid 100 square miles of natural soil, green with trees, rainbowed with flowers. It was a small island amid an ocean of steel, but it wasn't visible from where he stood. It might be 10,000 miles away. He did not know. Before very long, he must have his tour. He sighed noisily and realized finally that he was on Trantor at last, on the planet which was the center of all of the galaxy and the kernel of human race. He saw none of its weaknesses. He saw no ships for food landing. He was not aware of the jugular vein delicately connecting the 40 billion of Trantor to the rest of the galaxy. He was conscious only of the mightiest deed of man, the complete and almost contemptuously final conquest of a world. He came away a little blank-eyed. His friends on the elevator was indicating a seat next to himself, and Gal took it. The man smiled. My name is Gerald. First time on Trantor? Yes, Mr. Gerald. Thought so. Gerald's my first name. Trantor gets you if you got that poetic temperament. Trantorians never come up here, though. They don't like it. Gives them nerves. Nerves. My name's Gal, by the way. Why should it give them nerves? It's glorious. Subjective matter of opinion, Gal. If you're born in a cubicle and grow up in a corridor and work in a cell and vacation in a crowded sunroom, then coming up into the open with nothing but sky over it might just give you a nervous breakdown. They make the children come up here once a year after they're 5. I don't know if it does any good. They don't get enough of it, really, and the first few times they scream themselves into hysteria. They ought to start as soon as they're weaned and have a trip once a week. He went on, of course, it doesn't really matter. What if they never come out at all? They're happy down there, and they run the empire. How high up do you think we are? He said, half a mile, and wondered if that sounded naive. It must have, for Gerald chuckled a little. He said, no, just 500 feet. What? But the elevator took about, I know, most of the time it was just getting up to ground level. Trantor is tunneled over a mile down. It's like an iceberg. 9/10 of it is out of sight. Even if it works itself out a few miles into the sub-ocean soil at the shorelines. In fact, we're down so low that we can make use of the temperature difference between ground level and a couple of miles under to supply us with all the energy we need. Did you know that? No, I thought you used atomic generators. Did once, but this is cheaper. Imagine so. What do you think of it all? For a moment, the man's good nature evaporated into shrewdness. He looked almost sly. Gal fumbled. Glorious, he said again. You're on vacation? Traveling? Sightseeing? No, exactly. At least I've always wanted to visit Trantor, but I came here primarily for a job. Oh? Gal felt obliged to explain further. With Mr. Selden's project at the University of Trantor. Raven Selden? Why, no, the one I mean is Harry Selden, the psychohistorian Selden. I don't know any Raven Selden. Harry's the one I mean. They call him Raven. Slang, you know. He keeps predicting disaster. He does? Gal was genuinely astonished. Surely you must know, Gerald was now smiling. You're coming to work for him, aren't you? Yes. Well, I'm a mathematician. What does he predict? Why does he predict disaster? What kind of disaster? What kind do you think? I'm afraid I wouldn't have the slightest idea. I've read the papers of Dr. Selden and his group have published. They're on mathematical theories. Yes, the ones they publish. Gal felt annoyed. He said, I think I'll go to my room now. Very pleased to have met you. Gerald waved his arms indifferently in farewell. Gal found a man waiting for him in his room. For a moment, he was too startled to put into words the inevitable. What are you doing here? That came to his lips. The man rose. He was old and almost bald, and he walked with a limp, but his eyes were very bright and blue. He said, I am Harry Selden. An instant before, Gal's befuddled brain placed the face alongside the memory of the many times he had seen it in pictures. And that is the end of chapter 3. Thank you very much for being here with me this evening. I'm not going to read the whole book to you tonight. I will read more tomorrow. I'm going to choose a different book tomorrow and then a different book on Thursday. And then depending on the feedback I get from students, we'll decide which of the 3 we like the best and which one we're going to read all of. And then my plan is to keep reading at 9 in the evening, about 20, 30 minutes, just so we can keep some kind of face-to-face. If you have questions, concerns, shoot me an email, write me a message on Google Classroom. You do not have to read all of those books on your own. I put those there as resources so that you can read along with me. I miss you guys. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Be safe. Practice the social distancing. Wash your hands. Take care of your families. Be good to each other. And I will see you tomorrow.